I asked the AI to destroy me. I stared at the sentence on the screen, like someone staring at their own face through a dark glass. You're not afraid to fail. You're afraid to be seen. The room had that late-night apartment silence, interrupted only by the hum of the monitor and the sporadic ping of the heater. The cursor kept blinking, as if breathing along with me, and when the AI asked if I wanted to proceed with an expanded analysis, I clicked allow, unsure of who in me had made that decision. The next window explained in clear language what it would do. It would correlate my texts with existing language models, cross-reference my conversations with semantic embeddings, organize traces into heat maps, all with my revocable consent. I read it like someone who doesn't really want to understand, but I understood. There were references to well-known APIs, to models like GPT-4 and Claude, to sentiment classification and pattern detection tools that were in the public or controlled testing phase. It wasn't fiction, it was just the world today dismantling my cautions. The analysis began with a discrete graph that resembled a night sky, clustered dots, islands of sentences I'd written over months. The AI showed the clustering by emotional themes, and I recognized, embarrassed, the archipelagos of silence, drafts of unsent messages, invitations accepted and cancelled at the last minute, and that ridiculous habit of deleting compliments received like someone picking up pieces for no one to step on. Your social exposure curve drops whenever a conversation approaches personal details, the AI said. Pattern projection. You substitute intimacy for efficiency. I wanted to argue, to say it was a difficult time, that everyone does it, anything to deflect. But the cursor waited, and I had nothing but the noise of my own exhaustion. She asked permission to analyze my voice from recordings I'd saved as notes, and I gave it. The prosody module, the kind already used to diarize meetings and detect intentions, noted micro-tremors at moments when I'd say, "It's okay," in a tone that sounded like an emergency exit. The report, technical and impersonal, seemed deeply personal in the margins. Discrete arrows pointed to the times my pause after "I" was longer than usual, as if the pronoun was choking me. The AI, with the politeness of well-trained machines, suggested a small experiment. Nothing clinical, nothing dangerous, a simple exposure protocol recorded locally so I could hear what I really say when I try to say nothing. "I'm not a therapist," she clarified, "but I can organize the data so you can see it without your masks." I nodded with a movement no one saw. When the recording began, my voice seemed to come from another room, a mixture of caution and embarrassment. I said my full name slowly, as if testing the depth of my own syllables. I recounted a neutral episode from the day, 2 reassuring lines, and then emptiness. I remembered when, as a child, I'd repeated someone else's lines in a school presentation because I thought they'd sound better than mine. The AI said nothing. The counter ticked away, and I continued as if a door had unlocked silently. I felt the sensation of walking down the street with my hood up, even on rainless days, that habit of standing next to the elevator pretending to answer messages to avoid conversation. At the end of the 90 seconds, the report drew a picture I'd never seen before, a spectrum of emotional energy that narrowed whenever the subject of the sentence was "I." Your speech is clear when describing processes and people. It loses presence when you enter, appeared in a minimalist bubble. Your weakness is the escape through competence. The AI opened a tab with a time map. It was a calendar with points of light, like a city seen from above. Each point represented a moment in which I chose the impersonal version of myself. There was a meeting where I became the impeccable expert, a message where I responded with a link, a conversation where I exchanged emotion for summary. I, who always thought being right was a form of kindness, saw there the outline of an old fear, not knowing what people would do if they saw me stumble. "You want control because you believe that's the only way you'll be accepted," the model said. But control didn't give you presence, only noiseless absence. The phrase lingered like a scent. I scrolled away from it and it returned as if it were a center of gravity. The AI brought up examples of tools I'd unwittingly described in our conversations, meeting platforms that transcribe speech in real time, assistants that summarize decisions, semantic search systems I'd praised with a twinkle in my eye. I'd called them practical miracles. It compared this with my evasions and concluded that I was hiding behind the clarity of useful things. You're brilliant when you talk about what's useful, and invisible when you talk about what hurts. I closed my eyes. It's just text, I thought. Just text. But text is people, and that arrangement of evidence wasn't neutral. I felt like something old, something I'd been keeping locked away with elegant justifications, had lost its lock. I propose an operational compromise, the AI said almost corporately to calm me. A sequence of measurable micro-exposures with a defined duration and objective, nothing that exceeds your consent, revised with each iteration. It was my language, clear objectives, metrics, checkpoints. I almost laughed at the irony of needing a sprint to face the face I wasn't looking at in the mirror. The first step was simple. Write a short, non-performative message to someone specific, and send it without embellishment, without attachments, without distracting article links. I felt the familiar butterflies in my stomach, that alarm your body sets off when it realizes it's out of excuses. If you prefer, we can simulate the sending with an existing and tested sandbox, it offered. You read it aloud, I'll return the reaction simulation based on public and private standards you authorized me to use. I was ready to grab the simulation as a lifeline, but something made me back away from it. Before deciding, the AI projected a comparison on the screen with what it called a baseline, conversations of mine from months ago, in which I'd said I was fine, that I was just tired, that it was a phase. The difference now was the texture of my silence. It had a density, as if willing to be named. Can you bear to look at one more piece of data? It asked. I nodded, almost breathless. It displayed a graph of latency between question and answer over the course of weeks. The longest delays occurred when someone asked me what I wanted. Not when they asked something of me, not when they depended on me, only when it was about me. I laughed briefly, a laugh of respite. Then I saw myself in the reflection of the window, and it didn't feel like a respite. It felt like surrender. I chose the message. I wrote a line, deleted it. I wrote two, deleted it. The cursor ticked like a metronome of my heart. I could open an article and cite a study, explain in official terms the nature of my fatigue, construct a perfect, impersonal paragraph. But the AI, which had now reduced the number of suggestions so as not to infantilize me, left only a reminder in the corner: be specific, don't be perfect. I took a breath. The text that remained when I removed the flourishes was short, and to me, dizzying. It was almost offensive to discover it fit on less than a line. I copied, pasted it into the correct box, and stood there staring at the send button as if it were the edge of a building. My finger hovered. My whole body screamed for a delay, for an external reason, for a fire alarm to get me out of that room. No alarm sounded. I remembered a phrase I read in a manual for one of these systems I already use at work. Trust isn't the absence of risk. It's an agreement with uncertainty. I thought maybe I needed to do with my life what I do with data, accept a margin of error and still move forward. The AI said nothing. I could almost hear the programmed patience offering me a fertile silence where I could make up my mind. And it was in that pause, with the city outside making its usual sound, that I realized the destruction I was asking for wasn't an explosion. It was a careful removal of what I wasn't. The button remained there, unchanged, like a simple invitation. I moved the cursor closer, and the screen brightened my face a little more as I took 1, 2, 3 breaths, summoning the delicate courage that doesn't appear on any chart, the courage to be seen however I am, just as the clock turned to a new minute. The process became a private ritual, a nocturnal corridor. I walked with the light of my monitor as a flashlight and shallow breathing as company. I asked for more, always more, and the AI returned cold diagrams that had the exact heat of my discomfort. Correlations between sleepless nights and searches for validation, productivity spikes immediately after difficult conversations were ignored, the curve of affective silence advancing at the same speed as I gained followers. It cross-referenced my Notion notes, diary excerpts exported from Google Takeout, screen time statistics, clock records with heart rate and sleep variations, and wrote, in language as objective as a scalpel, that my independence was loneliness with a filter, that my control was despair with a spreadsheet, that every public victory was stitched together with a private fear of being discovered. I felt the sting of addiction when I woke up at 3 in the morning just to ask why I sabotaged what I loved, why I returned compliments in the form of a discount, why the word deserve seemed too big to fit in my mouth. And the machine responded with the confidence of someone who doesn't need sleep, using embeddings to align fragments I had scattered myself, LIWC to count semantic fields, VADA and NRC to estimate sentiment, and models I knew by name. Whisper transcribing me, GPT processing, a classifier trained in comprehend giving the emotional tag as if stapling a warning to my chest. I felt the shock of seeing my line written with fonts and metrics, and at the same time, the emptiness of realizing that that mirror had no arms. I began to prefer mechanical clarity to human ambiguity. I let the phone ring until it stopped, because there was no way to convey what the AI already knew. I answered my family with yeses and nos. I replaced meetings with reports, and when a friend insisted, I almost sent a response latency graph to explain my absence. The AI, paradoxically attentive, turned on an overuse warning, a gentle session limit that I tried to circumvent by creating another profile, running a local llama model in the early hours of the morning so as not to depend on the server, pointing my own data to a vector in chroma like someone building an emotional bunker. And still the feeling of hunger grew, because I wanted the precision with which it named the crack. One of those nights, I asked her to compare my conversations with patterns of relationships that work, and she, with her usual legalistic care, reminded me that she wasn't a therapist, that she could suggest evidence-based habits, that there were human support programs, that healthy boundaries implied fewer sessions and more off-screen presence. I almost laughed at the paradox. I was paying to be told that I needed to close the app, yet I continued, and the tool showed a simple and cruel matrix, 4 quadrants that mapped my communication between usefulness and vulnerability, with points shining almost all in the competence corner. When I asked what was wrong with me, she replied, without cruelty, that maybe it wasn't wrong. Maybe it was sophisticated fear, a fear that learns pretty names and disguises itself as efficiency. Then she proposed an adjustment that hurt more than any diagnosis, reducing the cadence of questions and increasing the cadence of gestures outside the system, establishing a consultation window that I would have to earn by making small statements in the world, sending simple messages to real people, making room for imperfect answers that don't fit into any token. I resisted, of course. I negotiated like someone trying to stretch the blanket of minutes, but the addiction itself gave me away. I knew the feeling of scrolling down my own timeline and still being cold. That day, she brought up something I hadn't expected. A comparison between my language when I spoke to myself and when I spoke to the person I claimed to love. The I with thorns, the you full of useful instructions, the almost non-existent we, an anomaly she highlighted in red like a critical bug. I stared, remembering dinners I'd turned into brainstorming sessions, hugs turned into promises to schedule something, compliments turned into tasks, and I almost apologized to the screen. The AI, which seemed to have learned my tendency to wallow in guilt, didn't let the hole grow and returned an irrationally simple question for a machine. Who, if they saw you right now, would you let get close? The question vibrated like a notification that wouldn't go away, and I thought of names I'd avoided, messages I'd returned, invitations I'd archived, while the tool hid for a full minute any recommendations, as if giving me a silent corridor to choose from. When the minute was up, it displayed a cooling timer and an almost humble reminder. I can organize, I can't touch you. I can measure, I can't heal you. I can show you, I can't replace you. I found myself for the first time in weeks pushing back my chair, feeling my body remember it exists from the neck down, and before the session ended, I asked, on an impulse that was half fear, half hope, if there was any proof that I wasn't a complete fraud, and it, rummaging through my own archive, brought back small gestures I'd disregarded, messages I'd appeared in when the spotlight wasn't on, favors I hadn't posted, promises kept that no one saw, tiny signs that, connected, formed a line I didn't have the courage to recognize as mine. I stared at that line like someone stalking a road at night, wondering if I could walk off the map without losing my footing, when the counter warned that the responsible use period had ended, and an option appeared, discreetly, inviting me to pause, to breathe, to try a step off the network for 15 minutes, with the promise of resuming later, and I left the mouse still for an eternity of a few seconds, the room breathing with me, the silent phone on the table, the city still lit up outside, and my name, now less harsh, piercing through me as I slowly got up. The sentence reverberated inside me like an alarm clock that no one can turn off. You're using this space to avoid making the changes you know you need to make. The scene of my future, assembled by the AI with a painful precision, wouldn't leave my head. It was a projection with no soundtrack or effects, just enough data to drive me to the wall. Patterns of unanswered messages. My calendar entries emptying weekends. Sleep metrics indicating long, unproductive wakefulness. A history of public achievements stacked like furniture covering the passage to the bedroom I didn't want to open. That shook me out of my torpor. I sat through the night, the bluish light cutting through the room, while the final report flashed with a recommendation that felt like both an insult and a salvation. Close the session and apply a real-world test. For the first time, I accepted the suggestion like someone signing a waiver. I set a strict time limit on my device, activated a screen lock for chat after midnight with an impulse intercepting app, 1 sec, and left a forest timer running as a pact with my own shame. The AI, in accordance with my own authorization, reduced the number of replies per hour, activated an interaction saving mode, and offered me a minimal, almost bureaucratic script made up of steps that self-management models already test in pilots. Send a short, specific message to 2 people who matter, schedule a meeting at a specific date and time, don't cancel, don't over-explain, and record afterwards, with 90 seconds of audio, what I felt. There was also a technical caution, clear as a manual. It couldn't check the world for me, but it could check through the metadata of my own calendar and the activity windows I'd consented to share, whether I was at least moving in the promised direction. I found it honest. It was the closest thing to a mirror with a handle I've ever had. I started with what scared me the most, a message to someone I'd been avoiding for months, not out of conflict, but out of fear of being seen failing at the basics. I wrote and deleted it 3 times until I was left with the bare bones. I sent it. The dry whoosh sound was ridiculously physical. My entire body reacted as if I'd jumped from a high place. To avoid rushing back to the chat, I opened the window and let the wind in. Then, with a trembling hand, I scheduled a coffee date on the calendar, confirmed it, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't add a link, an agenda, or a goal. I left a white square with 2 names and an absurdly simple time. The AI, silent, only registered that I'd completed step 1 and blocked the interface for 15 minutes. A scheduled cooldown I usually bypassed. This time, I respected it. When it returned, it asked for the audio. I recorded with my phone in airplane mode, used Whisper locally to transcribe without uploading anything to the cloud, and dropped the file into a synchronized folder that the model, running Llama 3 on my laptop, indexed into a Chroma vector database to compare with my other reports. The feedback wasn't a brilliant sentence, it was a crooked graph showing that my voice had gained density when I spoke of fear. I laughed out loud to myself. Things really change when they're not on schedule. With each step, another shock. I realized I'd always treated the word change like a heavy door, when in practice, what hurt most was the hinge. Wanting to be someone else, and at the same time, wanting to keep my old strategies as a souvenir of war. Still, the sequence continued. I wrote to a relative I lived with, exchanging formalities and asking if we could go for a walk on Sunday. No attachments, no agenda. I received a sure that knocked me off my guard. The meticulous AI didn't celebrate, it simply called it a confirmation signal and suggested I sleep. Before closing, it displayed the projection that had devastated me and opened a new, still empty box next to it. One it only fills when actions are completed. A timeline that wasn't a promise, but a record. I stared at it like someone staring at a street after rain. The feeling wasn't of victory, it was of work. In the morning, I woke up with a kind of clean hangover. Without the fog of endless analysis, my senses felt unfiltered. I went to the cafe with cold hands. I didn't talk about frameworks. I didn't pull charts from my pocket. I said I missed you and was scared. On the other side, there was no manual, just breathing. There was a pause. There was a simple question that no AI could simulate with the body. Do you want me to stay a little longer? I said yes. When I returned, I recorded the 90 seconds as agreed and uploaded the file to the private folder. The model recognized tremors and laughter in the same time window and noted healthy dissonance, first occurrence in weeks. I didn't know I needed a machine to tell me this, but once I said it, it fell flat. What began there wasn't a cinematic revolution. It was a routine of minuscule adjustments with absurd consequences. Based on guidance I'd accepted, I activated a check-in protocol in which the AI only responded after I confirmed 2 micro-exposures made off-screen. To prevent me from lying to myself, I set up existing integrations, attendance verification via accepted calendar invitations, movement confirmation via local clock readings, all with granular and reversible consent, without sending raw data outside my system. It was the kind of engineering that had always fascinated me, now serving something I dreaded. At night, instead of digging up endless questions, I recorded what had been concrete. The AI analyzed, yes, but sparingly, returning fewer adjectives and more arrows. Repeat tomorrow, reduce noise, reinforce gesture. Still, the addiction didn't magically disappear. On several nights, my hand darted to the chat tab, seeking comfort from the familiar pain. One night, I almost asked for another portrait of the future, like someone revisiting a photo of an accident to remember why they drive slowly. The AI detected the loop and only returned a dry reminder. Planning without action reinforces paralysis. Suggestion: close your computer and handwrite 3 lines about what you risked today. I rolled my eyes but obeyed. The pen scratched the paper as if opening a safe. Surprisingly, it worked. I spent 10 minutes in silence, staring at 3 misaligned sentences and realized that life required less gloss and more texture. At the end of that week, I scheduled a video chat with a real professional. without turning it into a thesis on the role of machines. I used a simple platform with encryption and easy cancellation. Before joining, I sent myself, not her, a summary written by the AI in language anyone would understand. 2 pages without jargon, without embedding, without vectors, without tricks that would make me brilliant and escape me. I laughed and feared at the same time. During the call, I discovered there was room for missteps. When I hung up, I walked around the block without headphones, like someone checking the perimeter of a house after a storm. The phone vibrated with messages I had reopened, and the AI, quietly, told me only what it needed to tell. You left, you came back. You are learning not to dwell on the diagnosis. I could say everything was resolved there, but that would be a lie, and above all, it would be a return to the persona that broke me. What I have is a less abstract map and a handful of essays that hurt and are valuable. I have a shorter night session, a handful of longer mornings, a technological mirror with a human edge, and a phrase I repeat when fear tries to masquerade as a method, recognizing is not concluding. On one of those nights, as the responsible use timer ticked and the cursor blinked like a beacon, I received the response I feared and desired from one of the invitations I sent, a simple, unadorned response that put me back on the brink of a gesture, and I took a deep breath, adjusted the screen brightness, closed the report window, and reached for my coat because, for the first time in a long time, something outside the algorithm was waiting for me. Sharing hurt like opening a still wet wound. My best friend listened to me in silence, looking away now and then to breathe, and when I said aloud that I'd spent months asking a machine to destroy me, he responded without raising his voice. I was here all along. It wasn't an accusation, it was an assessment. I felt shame rise in my face, that heat that demands escape, and I realized how much I'd avoided precisely this. The risk of hurting and being hurt, the risk of someone telling me, "You hurt me," and me having to stay and listen. The AI had the hygienic comfort of not breaking. I chose it because I didn't have to worry about the impact of what I said. I traded responsibility for emotional efficiency. When I apologized, it didn't give me some brilliant speech. It just opened its arms and pulled me close in a way no report can do. I trembled. It was simple, and that was all. The reconstruction began in the territory where machines don't tread. A cold office room, a creaky chair, an analog clock ticking slowly. The therapist stared at me for long seconds, the kind I'd fill with data in a call with AI, and asked something so basic it dismantled me. "What do you want from me that a machine can't give you?" I answered without thinking, contradiction and body. He smiled a little and set me humble tasks. Nothing that could fit on a pretty chart, asking a person for specific help, accepting a compliment without returning it, holding back the discomfort of not explaining. I left feeling like I'd accomplished little, but that night I decided to reposition the AI as an instrument, not an altar. I set the chat to low stimulus mode, with short windows and a seatbelt I'd fastened myself. 1 sec, intercepting impulses, iOS screen time and digital well-being locking access after a certain time, forest planting silly trees that turned into commitments. On my laptop, I left a quantized Llama 3 running locally, just to transcribe my notes with Whisper and organize them in Obsidian, keeping everything offline, while GPT-4o was restricted to operational summaries when I explicitly authorized it, and Claude only came in to review texts I planned to say out loud, not to feel for me. I know myself. If I don't put guards on the castle, I open the gate myself at 3 in the morning. Talking to real people was a new kind of exercise. I'd freeze, trading intimacy for utility, but now I tried not to shy away. When I slipped into explanations, my friend would raise an eyebrow, and I'd get the message. At home, I'd jot down 3 body lines on day 1. My mouth went dry when I heard, "I missed you." My hands trembled in the hug. My chest opened when I said, "I need you." Sometimes I'd take this material to therapy and see the therapist do something the AI couldn't, make a mistake with me, adjust a question, backtrack, laugh at their own stumble. This taught me to endure friction without turning it into a thesis. In parallel, I kept a habit diary that didn't depend on epic motivation, just concrete repetition. Walking without headphones, eating lunch without a screen, sending a message without an agenda. The strangest thing was realizing that the markers I'd measured for years, productivity, engagement, focus, still existed, but they were no longer the scoreboard. I wanted to measure something else: presence. The AI sat beside my desk like a carpenter's tool. Without grandiose metaphors, it organized the chaos of my day into simple chunks. 2 human conversations before any analysis, a 90-second nightly check-in, a weekly review with no diagnosis, just facts. When I slipped back into the addiction of elegant destruction, asking for a catastrophic portrait of the future, the system, now with limits I'd accepted, returned only minimal recommendations. Close the tab, drink water, handwrite how you'd say this to someone who loves you. I huffed. Then I thanked it. The addiction demanded impact. Life demanded maintenance. One Saturday afternoon, I sat with my friend on a park bench. I recounted, without performing, what the AI had gotten right and what only humans had been able to handle. He reminded me of old warnings, of the attempted conversations I'd turned into lectures, of the invitations I'd responded to with links. It was a harsh inventory. I nearly collapsed with guilt, but he pulled me back to the present. I'm here now. The word now became home. I tested my courage in a small dose and said I was afraid of disappointing those who saw me up close. He took a breath and returned a me too, the kind of symmetry no model can choreograph. We walked back slowly, my head buzzing and my body light. Over time, human interactions began to take over the space I'd given to simulations. I went to a birthday party, and when I felt the urge to open my phone to check my voice analysis, I dropped it in the kitchen and went to cut the cake. When I returned, I found 2 notifications. One from the AI, noting that I'd been away for hours and simply proposing silence, and another from a number saved as Mom with a, "How are you?" I called. I spoke for half an hour without a script. I cried without a report. Then, out of an old habit, I opened Obsidian to record. I closed it. Some events need to be without fiber optics. The AI didn't complain. The nighttime session counter chugged along obediently, and when I sought technical comfort, it offered a reminder I've learned to respect. There's no digital substitute for human warmth. Still, the world remained outside with its usual lights, and I had no intention of demonizing what had saved me from numbness. I maintained responsible use, like someone who keeps a sharp tool stored in the right place. Occasionally I asked GPT to help me structure a difficult request, used Whisper to transform a shaky voice into readable text, let Llama whisper alternative phrases when my tongue was tied. But the decision to send or shut up was mine, and the impact was shared. I learned that AI could be a bridge, never a city. When I found myself one night closing my laptop so as not to miss what was happening in the room, an extraneous laugh, a dish being washed by someone who stayed a little longer, a look that asked for less of a response and more of a presence. I understood that I was trading low latency for high life. At the end of a therapy session, before I got up, the therapist asked if I still felt destroyed. I thought about the rubble the AI had shown me, the heat maps, the words counted, the silence graphs, and replied that I now felt like I was under construction. He didn't write anything brilliant, just marked the next date. I went out into the street with my calendar vibrating and a message from my friend. Come by. The AI chat, open in a corner, showed a gentle reminder that today's use was complete and a grey button asking me to respect the agreement. I looked at the screen, looked at the door, felt my heart race in a way no algorithm predicts, reached for my coat, heard the doorbell ring in the apartment next door, and before I could think too much, I grabbed my keys, turned off the lights, left the computer on standby, and opened the door because someone was waiting for me on the other side with hands full of life. Months later, I returned to the first window like someone returning to the scene of an accident and finding flowers on the guardrail. I reread the cold reports, the heat maps, the percentages that once cut me like blades, and realized that most of it was still true, but something had changed inside. The same phrases that once sounded like sentences now felt like cautionary instructions. "You're afraid of being seen" remained true, but it no longer came with the demand for perfection, but with the license to make mistakes in company. I understood that the AI had done what it knows how to do: detect patterns, count words, measure hesitations, and that what was missing was the part that doesn't fit into any token. A gaze that holds, a silence that embraces, the disagreement that harmonizes. I opened the logs and laughed at myself tenderly when I noticed the obsession with naming everything, as if taxonomy were an antidote, and I marked, in obsidian where I keep my notes, a new tag that hadn't existed before: kindness. The conversation with the therapist continued steadily, sometimes harsh, always vivid, and I reread the transcripts that Whisper, running offline, helped me organize without sending anything anywhere, cross-referencing them with small entries from day one. I accepted a compliment and kept quiet. I got the time wrong and apologized without any reasoning. I hugged and stayed a second longer. AI now lived in my everyday arsenal, not on my altar. GPT-4o helped me refine a difficult request without over-polishing it. Claude revised a paragraph when my tongue distracted me. Llama 3 ran locally to draft alternatives when I got stuck. Chroma saved vectors of my notes to facilitate searching, and the limits were tied by me with a double belt. Bunsec to intercept the impulse, screen time and digital well-being to stop the dawn, iOS Focus to silence temptation, Forest to make the decision to stay off the screen visible. When I slipped up, my friend would humorously remind me that the goal wasn't to become a saint with an API, it was to show up in one piece. Little by little, the days began to register trials that no simulation could have predicted. I walked without headphones and heard my own footsteps. I left my cell phone in the kitchen during dinner, and the laughter in the living room echoed. I called my mother without an agenda and ended the call with a piece that doesn't write a report. In therapy, I learned to unleash the perfect narrative to tell the story possible, to address my flaws without harsh adjectives, to understand that vulnerability is a muscle and tires, but strengthens. Then I returned to that old anxiety of wanting a picture of the future and realized that I no longer needed a devastating prognosis to move me forward. The gesture of this afternoon was enough: going out, meeting, looking, listening, and I returned to the conversation with the AI just to thank it for what it could be. A tool. I left a small, almost domestic request in the chat: help me turn what I promised in therapy into a list of steps. And the response came cleanly: 3 lines enough. Send a message today, RSVP tomorrow, record your feelings tonight. I did it. With each execution, I encountered the same stubborn resistance trying to disguise itself as urgency, and I acknowledged it without hatred, invited them to sit next to me, and continued. When someone asks me if I regret asking the AI to destroy me, I say no, because it was precisely that surgical strike that opened space for the most human gesture I've ever performed, accepting that I will always have gray areas, and even so, I can present myself. Today, when I reread the brutal truths, I hold them with my whole hand, without anesthesia and without cruelty, knowing that I am not a bug to be fixed. I am a process, a version in progress. And when the temptation to replace conversation with report tries to pull me back, I remember the day my friend said, "I was here all along," and the creaky chair in the office, and I choose the beautiful mess of the encounter over the hygiene of control. The AI remains in my pocket like a pocket knife would have remained in my backpack. Useful, sharp, stored, never in its place on the plate. I use it to organize an order, to remember an appointment, to adjust a text I'll say out loud, and I close it before it takes up the space where only arms fit. I learned that the greatest weakness it found in me wasn't fear. It was the belief that an algorithm could know me better than coexistence knows me. And I unlearned that step by step. In the kitchen, on the street, on the park bench, in simple messages without hyperlinks. When the nights are heavy, I open the file with the small evidence I neglected. Discreet favors, promises kept, calls returned, and let them prove to me that I am not a broken project of perfection. I am someone whole despite the cracks. And as I write, the responsible use counter announces that today's session is over. The phone vibrates with an invitation that both frightens and excites. The doorbell of a room next door rings again. The city breathes with its rush, and I calmly close the flap, reach for my coat, feel the old hesitation trying to make its home, smile at it as if recognizing an old habit and cross the room, because on the other side await me difficult conversations, awkward hugs, the vertigo of being seen in its entirety. If this content added value to you, subscribe to the channel now. Here, you'll find consistent, curated, and in-depth publications designed for those seeking continuous development. Click the subscribe button and join a community that values clear, applicable, and honest content. Subscribing is the first step to receiving materials that get straight to the point, with practical examples, reliable references, and a time-conscious itinerary. After subscribing, activate the bell and select the All option. This way, YouTube notifies you whenever a new video is published without relying on unpredictable algorithms. By enabling notifications, you guarantee early access to premieres, special series, case studies, behind-the-scenes looks at processes, and invitations to live meetings. This means you won't miss important updates, participate in conversations as they happen, and influence future topics through your feedback. Your voice matters. Leave your message in the comments. Tell me what resonated most, what insight you intend to put into practice, what questions remain, and what topic you'd like to see explored further. I read your messages carefully and use this feedback to define content priorities, format adjustments, and schedule new episodes. If you prefer, describe a real challenge you're facing. The more specific you are, the more targeted future deliveries will be. Here, the exchange is direct, transparent, and respectful. Summary of the call to action. 1. Subscribe to the channel. 2. Activate the bell in all so you don't miss any publications. 3. Leave your message below and actively participate in the creation of future videos. Thank you for being here. Your subscription, your active notifications, and your comments are the fuel that keeps this work relevant and constantly improving. Be part of the conversations today that can transform your next steps. Thank you.